January 21st, 2019, looking to Council for disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof, seeing none. Looking for approval of minutes from November 12th, 2018 of FSP. I'll look at people who are here, perhaps Councillor Veith and Mayor Jaworski. All those in favor? That's carried. That takes us into presentations. Last week we had CAO and IPPW present their 2019 business plans. This week is corporate services. And so I will look to Ms. Patel to lead us off.
Good afternoon, Chair Henry, Mayor Jaworski, and members of Council. My name is Keshra Patel, in case you've forgotten from last week. And I'm the Commissioner of Corporate Services and also the Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer for the City of Waterloo. As Corporate Services Department, we are the centralized source for the business support functions and the governance functions within the city. We deliver this service through our professional divisions and disciplines of corporate communications, finance, fleet and procurement services, human resources, information management and technology services, and legislative services. Each of these divisions is led by a director who is a specialist in their field. As the Chief Financial Officer of the City, it is my role to provide independent financial advice to the corporate management team, to our operating divisions, and to Council on all financial issues. This is done through the teams led by our two Deputy Chief Financial Officers within Finance. In corporate services, each of our divisions, whether it is IT or HR or fleet procurement as an example, we work collaboratively with our business partners, understanding their business and priorities and supporting them in developing solutions. As Corporate Services Department, we strive to live our core value of service excellence and to be the provider of choice for our business support functions, ensuring statutory compliance and open and transparent decision making. With this, I will turn over the presentation to Tony Ivaroni, our Director of Corporate Communications.
Thank you, Ms. Patel. Good afternoon, Chair Henry, members of Council. The mandate of the Corporate Communications Division is to build trust between the organization and the public through two-way conversations and strategic communication products. Services include strategic and internal and external communications, digital services and content management, design and brand services. For the year 2019, we have three priorities that we've identified through the business plan. The corporate brand review. I'd like to start by saying that this is not an exercise to create a new logo or corporate identity. What we've discovered is that our brand guidelines are a bit out of date, and the application of our logos and colors are not being properly used. We would like to do a comprehensive review and inventory of where we are and how our corporate identity is currently being used, and create a process for ensuring compliance to the newly developed guidelines. This will strengthen our corporate identity and should provide efficiency in the future by creating approved templates that avoid misuse of corporate identity materials. In 2018, Corporate Communications led a refresh of our corporate website. The new look, streamlined website was launched in mid-December. The clearest trend so far is we have seen a significant increase of more than 75% in overall website usage, with an even larger increase in mobile users, more than 4,000% increase. The enhanced mobile features of the new site seem to be having the desired effect. While we believe the site looks good and is functioning well overall, there are a number of other improvements to content and navigation we continue to make. Some of it is regular ongoing maintenance, while others are improvements that were of a larger scale or more complex and couldn't be completed prior to launch, so that remains a focus area for our division this year. Also in 2018, the Corporate Communications Division undertook a structure of its review with the goal of articulating a clear divisional mandate, which I've shared earlier, creating succession planning opportunities for team members, and a better process for work intake. We're also placing a greater emphasis on connecting with the community digitally. We've consolidated into one section our social media, website, and public engagement. One of our goals is to provide more strategic communications to the community and organization and ensure our work is better aligned with the city's strategic plan. Next up is our Director of Financial Planning, Philippa Reynolds.
I think last week we let them all run and then we saved our questions and did that. So we can change it, but I think we can. Yeah, fair enough.
Financial planning areas, this area of my responsibility. This team drives business strategy and sound financial decision making by developing policy and providing ongoing financial advice to council, senior management, and staff throughout the organization. In addition to leading the corporate-wide budget process, some of the services we provide are coordinating the citywide grants process, ongoing development of the long-term financial plan, project managing the development charge background study, monitoring and reporting on reserves and reserve funds, investments, and debt, performing rate modeling for a variety of city divisions, costing labor-related scenarios for negotiations, performing a variety of year-end activities, including analysis, reconciliations, and answering third-party auditor questions, quarterly operating variance analysis, and annual capital reporting. The first item on this slide relates to my team, and so our most significant initiatives for 19 include the completion of the 2019 budget, which is before you currently, as well as the development of the 3-year budget. This will happen within the actual fiscal year of 19 so that we can deliver a 3-year budget for Council's consideration later in the year. And in tandem with the 3-year budget, we will also be coordinating the development charges background study and updating the long-term financial plan, as those will be key inputs into that budget process. And I will now be passing it on to Director of Revenue and Accounting, Paul Hettinga.
Thank you. Revenue and Accounting Services is a very transaction-oriented area. As you can understand, we do initiate a significant amount of transactions, and I ran some numbers on that. We issue approximately 300,000 tax, water, and other bills each year and process over 400,000 payments related to these bills. Over 90% of these payments that we processed were through electronic means such as web banking, pre-approved payments, and electronic funds transfers. The section also processes 15,000 invoices for the payment of goods and services, 30,000 payroll payments, and close to 700 monthly financial reports are delivered. So as you can understand, technology is a very important part in order for us to get to those levels, and we have 2 projects that we have planned for 19 that revolve around making those transactions improved even more. The first being the payroll timesheet automation project. This project was approved as part of the 2016 to 2018 budget, and funding was released in 2017. The first stage of the pilot of self-entry by salaried staff went live late in 2018, and the project goal is to minimize manual time entry, create capacity, and provide better financial information for the management of the city. The second project is the delivery of a tax and water billing web portal. The city currently does offer electronic tax and water bills through ePost, but we're not finding that a lot of our citizens are finding that service very attractive to sign up for. So the hope is that a new portal will provide more information to our tax and water ratepayers that will enable us to get a lot more of them signed up on that, and thereby reducing phone and in-person inquiries. I'll just turn it over to Fleet and Procurement Services. Tracy Bell is the director.
Good afternoon. Fleet and Procurement Services is a newly formed division as of December 2018. The fleet section is responsible for the acquisition, disposition, maintenance, and repair of our fleet assets, and also for ensuring compliance with all our legislated requirements. The Ministry of Transportation mandates a safety rating for all commercial vehicles in Ontario, and our safety rating impacts our ability to operate. We must have and maintain a valid commercial vehicle operator's registration certificate. We also maintain 3 fuel sites which must be in compliance with the Technical Standards Safety Act. The requested position of Fleet Customer Service Representative in the 2019 budget would support the ongoing registration, licensing, and certification requirements that we need to follow. The procurement section supports the city's capital projects, needs, operational requirements through open, fair, and transparent procurement activities. We're also responsible for the inventory management of the city's stockroom located at the Waterloo Service Centre. Some of our key initiatives for 2019 include development of a fleet policy with supporting standard operating procedures, the development and issuance of a request for information to move forward with the procurement of a fleet management information system A new system would help us with greater tracking and reporting capabilities. To incorporate some allowances that exist under two new trade agreements, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, and which is an interprovincial trade agreement, and the Comprehensive European Trade Agreement. Both came into effect in 2018. The bylaw would also look after some general housekeeping items. As some members of council are aware, in 2018 we undertook a pilot project using qualifications-based selection. This was for the Waterloo Public Library mechanical upgrades. I will be collaborating with the project manager to provide an update to council on this project once it moves a little bit more forward in the construction process. Fleet and procurement also has a menu item 2, for fleets, parts, and specialists. As you're aware, our current complement of 5 fleet technicians and 1 welder are very skilled. They maintain and repair the city's 350 fleet assets. During winter control, they work shifts to provide 12-hour on-site service, and they're on call the remaining 12 hours Monday to Friday and on call during the weekends. They are required to spend approximately 1.5 hours today sourcing and ordering non-routine parts that aren't available in the stockroom, and this takes a lot of their time. And it also results in increased vehicle downtime, limited preventive maintenance programs. So we do the legislated preventive maintenance programs, but not on the other vehicles. Increased overtime and some increased outsourcing. Approval of the parts and service specialists would increase the fleet wrench and hand time and create greater efficiencies in the department. Now I'm going to transfer over to Susan Farley, Director of Human Resources.
Thank you, Tracy. And through you, Chairman Henry, Mayor Jaworski, members of council and colleagues, Human Resources plays a strategic role in managing people and the workplace culture at the City of Waterloo. We support over 800 employees, and our department is unique in that we also are responsible for guiding the resource of approximately 600 volunteers, supporting direct City of Waterloo programs. Human Resources and volunteer services are aligned in the similar principles of supporting people in both the paid and the unpaid workforce. It is no understatement to say that the City of Waterloo could not provide the services that we do without our precious people resources. Our first business plan initiative for 2019 is to ensure legislative compliance and policy review and development. There have been several recent changes in legislation, such as the implementation of Bill 148 and the subsequent repeal of certain aspects of this bill. We will be conducting a comprehensive review to identify any gaps and to make revisions as needed. The second initiative is for succession planning, program development, and implementation. Our statistics show that within 5 years, 141 City of Waterloo employees will be eligible to retire with unreduced pensions. This number represents approximately 25% of all full-time employees at the city. This is higher than the recent findings of approximately 20% when this analysis was conducted for other municipalities. Therefore, attraction and retention of employees is top of mind. We need to ensure that we remain competitive. We will be taking a multifaceted approach, reviewing compensation, looking at training and development opportunities to grow current and future leaders, and reviewing the models of other municipalities to review their succession plan programs. Our third business plan initiative is the development of a volunteer services manual and communication plan. We will be finalizing the volunteer engagement policy and seeking feedback from staff in departments that work with direct volunteers to review programs and needs. We will also develop a communication strategy to further promote volunteerism opportunities at the City of Waterloo in the community. In the 2019 budget, the request of a full-time equivalent position for an HR assistant position is included. This position would support recruitment, training and development, health and safety, and volunteer services. The role would also be key in maintaining the legislatively required driver's files and providing backup for PeopleSoft entry, which is required for payroll processing. Having this position would allow our HR generalists and HR analysts to play a more supportive role to their client groups and to assist with strategic projects such as policy development and job evaluation. In closing, I would now like to invite Max Min, Director of Information, Management and Technology Services, to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fairley. Good afternoon, Chair Henry, Mayor Jaworski, and the members of Council. IMTS Division is a business unit which provides IT leadership, solutions, and services that address and meet the needs of our customers and the community. There are 4 sections and a total of 20 full-time employees in our division. Internally, IMTS is guided by the IT Steering Committee. We follow the directions set out in the 5-year Corporate Technology Roadmap. Externally, we are actively working with our peers through the Waterloo Region Education and Public Network, the Intermunicipal IT Collaborative Committee Channel, and the Municipal Information Systems Association. Next, I will briefly talk about our 3 key initiatives in 2019. The first project is the Corporate Relational Database Management System hardware refresh. Database management systems are crucial and important links in the creation and management of data. Outdated hardware and software crashes more often, causing more downtime and decreased productivity. Invest on database server hardware will speed up most of the enterprise applications. The second project is replacement of uninterruptible power supply system for the secondary data center. Using high-quality UPS can help protect the hardware against the damage from unexpected power failures and unclear power. The current UPS is 12 years old and is very close to the end of its life. The third project is internal fiber network infrastructure upgrade. Some fiber optical cables we have installed 20 years ago will be replaced to catch up the growing capacity need. We will leverage the construction and renovation projects wherever possible to minimize the cost. IMTS Division will boost the confidence and trust of the organization by demonstrating our innovation, expertise, skill, knowledge, and in understanding and meeting the requirement for technology. We will continue to support City Council on making Waterloo a better place. With that, I'm passing over to Ms. Olga Schmitz, the Director of Legislative Services. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Henry and members of Council. The Legislative Services Division consists of 2 sections, the Clerk's Office and the Elected Officials Office. Our role is to administer statutory responsibilities and legislative processes for Council staff and the public, manage committee council meetings, including agenda, minutes, and bylaws, boards and committees, including appeal tribunals, elected officials' events, constituency support, include council orientation for the new term of council. The 2018 election resulted in 4 new councillors being around the horseshoe. Specifically for the new councillors, we know the learning curve and information can be overwhelming. Some training has already been provided on including understanding the role of council, municipal conflict of interest, code of conduct, key governance policies, planning act, etc. Ongoing updates on city key issues, projects, and relevant training will be provided through the rest of 2019. Our review of our procedural bylaw was last updated in 2007. Staff will undertake a review of the current bylaw to ensure aspects of the bylaw are still relevant and include recent changes made to the Municipal Act, including the ability for a council member to participate electronically in a public meeting. The Code of Conduct was also updated in 2009. Staff will undertake a review of the current code to ensure aspects of the code are still relevant and are up to date pursuant to the Municipal Act. Our open text workflow, we will, in 2019, staff will implement document approval workflows, starting with electronic circulation of staff reports for comments, edits, and final approval, eliminating the need to circulate paper copies of the reports. These workflows will reduce paper, save time, and enhance records management practices through an audit trail and versioning. Additional workflows will be developed for the approval of archival records retention, transfer, and record holds. I now return it back to Keshwar with closing remarks.
Thank you, Olga. So with this, my colleagues and I wrap up the business plan presentation for corporate services, and our team is available to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patel, and to your team for presentations and for a detailed work plan for 2019. I'll look to members of council for questions. So I'll start since Councillor Freeman was getting in early.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. I had a few questions on a few different reports. So my first one was with regard to communications. So the one capital budget item for 2019 is with regard to the extended call center support for 311. So the project sheet 401 does identify that the 311 customer call center was not supported by council when it first came, but that somehow we're working in partnership with the City of Kitchener. And so I'm just trying to better understand that. I think we said no to 311, and certainly in the municipalities that have 311, if you've ever called them, it's a lost void. I've spent quality time on the City of Ottawa's 311 line till I gave up entirely. So I don't support it. I don't want to see this initiative advance. So can you help me to understand why we're spending money on this?
Sure. Through you, Chair Henry, to the councillor. What we're proposing, councillor, would be to pilot with enforcement services the use of Kitchener's 311 service to provide after-hour service to and coverage to enforcement services. So primarily that would be in the evening and on weekends. You're right. It's my understanding that the previous council did determine that we wouldn't go forward with our own call center, but we wanted to look at opportunities to provide better service to the community and extend the service that enforcement services provide. So we were looking at piloting and seeing if that could work.
Okay. I guess I still don't necessarily think that's money well spent, given the relationship that we do have with Waterloo Region Police for after hours coverage too. So. I'll just leave that for the February conversation. And then you started to talk about the branding exercise, which is Project Sheet 402. And we did adventure into this space some years ago, I want to say about 5 or 6 years ago. And if memory serves me correct, more broadly, we're not really selling things at the city. And I know that you said it's about using the brand consistently, and that internally we're maybe not doing that. But I also am not convinced that it's money well spent, because I don't think the broader citizenry looks to that as a barrier to understanding whether their tax bill's coming from us, the water bill's coming from us, an email's coming from us. I think they know who we are. They know how to find us. They really don't like us spending their money. And I'm struggling with, so between those two, right, that's $200,000, which is, it's a movement on the tax number that I'm just not comfortable with. So I think I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
And I take it that wasn't looking for a response.
Through you, Chair Henry. No, and I appreciate the comments, Councillor. It's a fair point that we're not necessarily selling commercial products in a sense, but we do have, there's some value in having consistency in the way that our logo and the way that our colors and the way our identity is projected to the community, so that for little things sometimes, on uniforms, for example, to ensure that they look the same and that we're easily identifiable. So we're thinking that there's some opportunities where that isn't happening consistently. So we'd want to look at that and see if we can bring some consistency.
So I can let you move on to other departments, and we can let Tony go. Maybe we can take comm while Tony's up. Is that okay, Councillor Freeman? Or? Sure. Go ahead, Councillor Bonnelly.
Through you, Chair Henry. I'm just curious about the Engage Waterloo platform. There's S8 in the operating budget has $20,000 increase there. Recognizing that this isn't a significant amount of money, I'm just curious how the city looks at the Engage Waterloo platform and what success looks like, whether there is a numerical way of identifying whether or not we are in fact reaching out to citizens and engaging them on the various initiatives that we're reaching out on. Is there data or numbers or information that we can point to this year and then say 4 years from now to say, yes, this is working, as opposed to just a number, as opposed to just a budget amount?
Through you, Chair Henry, to the councillor. That's a challenge to have a benchmark that could be applied consistently. The different topics, of course, would generate different levels of interest. So one of the things we would look at is sort of the level of engagement and how robust our subscription list is. So people are required to register to participate in the Engage. So we have we went to a new platform this year. It was with another vendor. We went to bang the table. So we had to ask people, for example, would they want to stay on there? Would they want to continue to subscribe? And we had an almost 100% return on that. So there does seem to be a high level of interest, and we do hear that frequently, that people do want to engage with council, do want to provide commentary. So it's a fair point that we could look at whether there should be some metrics and some benchmarks that we could look at year over year. But I do believe that there's some nuances per topic that make it difficult to have something that's a standard.
Anything else on communications from others? For Tony, Tony, just further on Councillor Bartley's question, I know I'd asked you this question offline, and that was where this $20,000 expense was coming from, and that you told me it wasn't new; it was just new to the budget. Can you elaborate on that and clarify?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. We did have the Engage Waterloo expense for the last 4 years, really. It was about $18,000 a year, and that was put together and financed through different sources. It wasn't a line item in the budget. So what we've done is we brought it forward and put it into the operating budget. So we sort of cobbled it together before to ensure that we did offer this service. So it's not necessarily a new expense, but it's new appearing as an operating line item.
I thought that was helpful. Since we changed systems, I was wondering if it was because of the change of system. But no, it's a consistent expense with the new system. Okay. If there's nothing else for communications, Councillor Freeman, who's the next division up?
It's kind of a combined question, I think, between finance and human resources. So it's with regard to the payroll timesheet automation project, which the $750,000 is already funded. And so I see that here. And then on the deferred initiatives for HR, it says time and attendance module. And I'm trying to understand why the time and attendance component couldn't be achieved through timesheet automation.
Through you, Councillor Chair Henry, to the Councillor Freeman. I'll maybe start off there and kind of explain the project a little deeper in regard to what is going on, and maybe that'll answer your question.
And, sorry, I can tell you when you do that, I'd really love it if you could help me to understand the efficiencies that'll be gained from this with regard to allocation of dollars to utilities and other services. So if people are recording their time and allocating towards a project, such as activity-based assignment for, say, a utility build or capital project or whatever, like how we anticipate efficiencies from that.
This project is for salary and hourly individuals that don't report their time in that manner. The QP staff do that approach, and there is a project ongoing related to Maximo in terms of automating those timesheets. So I think, but definitely in terms of savings of time, right now we have people entering their time on a spreadsheet, whether in Excel, typically in Excel, and that goes to the admin assistant who enters it, and then it gets vetted and entered into PeopleSoft for salary. So there's some significant time savings. It's not in terms of one FTE because it's spread out over 200 some odd employees that will achieve these 15 minutes of savings every 2 weeks. And really it's in terms of capacity that's being built to ensure that we aren't in front of this council in future years asking for additional staff and payroll. We've had about the same number of staff in payroll for the last 20 years, and over that time we've doubled the amount of time entry that we've processed. So technology projects such as these are imperative to keep that equation balanced.
And can that not achieve the time and attendance piece that is deferred in the HR budget?
I would say we are doing the time and attendance piece in 18/19. So we've got the pilot live for salary. I'll maybe defer to Susan and ask that she maybe provide a little more clarity on what was deferred there, or if it was the piece that was initially going to be completed in 16 to 18 that is being completed now in 19.
I think it's the interpretation of the page, Councillor Freeman, that may help. For councillors in the business plan, I'm seeing this on page 79, and the heading is a look back at 216 to 218. And so, as Paul had mentioned, this was a funded initiative in 2017 where the dollars were allocated, but the work wasn't completed during that budget cycle. So it was deferred in the last council term, and so now it's on the priority list to happen in this council term, and it's already been funded. So it was deferred from 217, 218 to 2019. It doesn't need new funding, but it's happening now. So that's the balance of deferral and happening.
So if I understand you correctly, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's deferred to now.
I'm getting confirmation, yes.
Okay. and if I could, Chair, I just wanted to let staff know how much I appreciated the alignment that they provided between the budget overview sheets and the actual project sheets and the budget documents. I can't tell you how helpful that has been this year.
It's good to hear. I understand it was a fair amount of work to do that crosstalk, so I appreciate that. I know staff appreciate that it was time well spent. Other members of council have questions for Paul or anybody else, since I think I don't hear any more from Councillor Freeman. Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you. Thank you. Through you, I had a few questions around the PeopleSoft project, and they may be more things that I need to get caught up on as a new councillor. I did appreciate hearing that the whole project had been deferred, going from 216 to a pilot in 218 and then a rollout seemed a little confusing to me, but your responses to Councillor Freeman did help with that, and I may offline ask some more questions about that project. So thank you very much.
Other questions from councillors on any of the business plan units and groups? Councillor Bradley for Tracy.
Through you, Chair Henry. And I apologize, this might get confusing here, but it's confusing to me. So there seems to be a lot of activity in the operating budget surrounding fleet, and I'm trying to sort of holistically look at them together between some of the menu items and some of the items that are just recommended. And I say that in particular looking at the menu items where there's the request in M2 for a fleet parts and service specialist, which I know that you touched on at $123,000. And then there's discussion around operating pressures in fleet, $275,000, with a non-recommended menu item reduction as suggesting that we could theoretically take that off by another $75,000. And there are other FTEs in fleet as well for a fleet customer service position. So I'm looking at all of this, and my question sort of ties around the theory of the second menu item for the fleet parts and service specialist, and whether or not looking at that person as an addition is going to, you mentioned that it's going to provide efficiencies to the fleet department. Is that something that we can actually put a number to and theoretically look at M2 as being something that is approved, while also looking at M11 and saying, maybe we don't need to take into consideration the full $275,000 of the operating pressures?
Through you, Councillor Henry. The parts and service specialist, we had a comprehensive fleet review last year. It was undertaken, and the fleet technicians are currently spending 1 to 3 hours per day sourcing and purchasing the non-stock parts. And these are specialized parts they need to make the repairs. We calculate that through a parts and service specialist addition, we would earn 1 FTE fleet technician in time, which would allow more focus on preventative maintenance programs. So right now our fleet technicians are able to, they're working what we legislated have to do. So our CVOR vehicles, our commercial vehicles, doing the inspections that are required. We're not focusing any time on preventative maintenance for the other vehicles that we have. So we're looking to do that. We're outsourcing some of the repairs, and we have some additional overtime just to keep up to date on the legislative requirements. So those are some of the efficiencies we're looking for with the parts and service specialist. We have been in a bit of a underfunded position for the tax-based operating component. So the budget request for the I think it was 275,000 would bring that more up to par, but we've been in a deficit for some time in our area, so we could continue on in a bit more of a deficit by reducing that to 200,000.
And just, I guess, sorry, through you, Chair Henry. And do you believe? I'm really looking at those two menu items specifically. Is there any? Recognizing that they're not exactly the same amount of money, you're talking about $75,000, reducing the budget pressure amount by $75,000, and the fleet parts and service specials $123,000. So I recognize that they're not equivalent, but is there any thought in the fleet department that if we were to activate both of those menu items, that there may well be a reduction in the deficit pressure because of the fact that we're adding in a new fleet specialist who's going to be able to perform some of the efficiencies that you bring forward?
Yes. I'm going to pass this up.
Through your Chair Henry to Councillor Bodley. So the 275 will deal with the deficit that we're currently running. So when we did our forecast, a Q3 surplus deficit report for last year, we anticipated, I think off the top of my head, about a 380,000 shortfall in fleet services. So this 275 will help us address that shortfall. When it comes to the menu item, that's going to deal with a shortfall that we have in labor hours or wrench time that is available to cover preventive maintenance for most of the vehicles that we have. So they're two distinct and separate issues. The fleet review that was done by a specialized consultant that has 30 years experience in dealing with fleet, Mercury Associates, they did identify that there was a need for increased wrench time, as well as there was also a need for good quality data so that we could have data-driven decision making. So those are all the different pieces that we're pulling together and trying to get fleet into, I guess, more modern technology and use and reporting to have good decision making. So one addresses the past deficit. It just gets us back to a ground floor level. The second helps us get to preventive maintenance for other vehicles that we should be really dealing with.
I'm looking to staff desk to see if there's anything more you folks would like to add. Go ahead, Brad.
So through you, Chair Henry, Councillor Bodley, I just direct you to information paper I-5, which will provide a little bit more background on the historical deficit or pressure of 275, so separate from the fleet mechanic. This is a historical shortfall of equipment costs within the various divisions, and it was actually a little bit larger than that. As part of the long-term financial plan, we had allocated about $100,000 in additional funding for that to get us a little bit closer. So this is to build us up with ongoing deficits in that area. So basically, over time, when we're not inflating the city fleet lines, we get an accumulated pressure like this. So what we're trying to do is catch up. So as we bring in other surplus drivers, we need to be cognizant of deficit drivers as well, so we don't budget ourselves into a deficit. So that's why this has been put forward. The menu option to reduce it, while it's not being recommended, it's an option for council to consider if they're looking to reduce that tax rate. We realize $275,000 is a good amount of money. $200,000 would also be a step in the right direction, but what we do need is $275,000. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you very much. I know it's complicated, so I appreciate you giving me some more feedback on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's, I think, helpful to get that discussion going and knowledge going of which parts interact with each other and which ones don't interact with each other. And I think, for those of us around the table for a while, the last several budgets have tried to bring both revenue in, but also some of the expenses in that are there, whether or not we budget for them. They just have to be there, and this is one of those that when you see the quarterly surplus deficit reports, you always see a note in fleet around these. That's been a consistent marker of my time on council. And some areas of persistent surplus, which you're also seeing as well, so they do offset. Other questions for staff in corporate services around business plans or associated items? I think Councillor Freeman and Councillor Bodley asked both of the ones I had on those, particularly around fleet. And I thank Tracy for going through the detail of really an equivalent of an extra FTE that comes from a parts FTE as well, should Council choose to go in that direction. Councillor Bonnegar, please go ahead.
I have one question for HR, actually. So welcome back. So through you, Chair Henry. I'm just wondering, you mentioned that the new HR position that's being requested, it sounds like they'll be able to pick up some of the more day-to-day stuff so that current staff can shift their focus to broader HR issues. What do we gain from that shift, and what if we decide not to put that position in, where does it leave your department?
Great. Yes, thank you. And through you, Chairman Henry and Councillor Bonnegar. So the position is really critical for our department. It is a front-facing position. So one of the first people you see coming into our HR departments would be the HR assistant that we're looking for as part of this budget. With this statistic we're looking at with recruitment, we are facing an incredibly heavy recruitment period. We already are in a recruitment sort of a flux. We have a lot of positions that we need filled, heavily administrative in terms of contacting candidates, setting up interviews, getting the paperwork ready, and that flow through. With this role, this would also be a backup to the entry into PeopleSoft. So right now we don't have a full backup. The HR analyst, is the backup. That is a position that is heavily involved with pension and benefits management, as well as supporting time and attendance and reporting through PeopleSoft. So when that person has to do backup for entry, they are pulled away from those projects, heavily tied into the PeopleSoft requirement. In terms of having that person assist with volunteer services, again, this person would be the main backup for volunteer services. We have Christine Rushton here today. She's a coordinator of volunteer services. So she would be a support to that role as well. Freeing up the HR generalist would provide opportunity for them to assist with tasks such as the policy review, policy writing, projects such as supporting succession planning projects which we're working on, key initiatives such as job description writing, as well as support for job evaluation, equity projects for our various groups. So with that, they'd be able to provide a more supportive role to the client groups that we serve here at the City of Waterloo in terms of working with directors, working with managers and employees on any issues that they have. Right now, they are heavily tied up supporting a lot of the administrative functions in relation to recruitment specifically. So this role really is key in terms of being able to provide better front-facing service in our department for the City of Waterloo, as well as for our own team and support in many areas. Okay, thank you.
I thought that might spark something. Councillor Vasek.
Through you, Chair. It's actually not really related, but it did spark a thought. And a general question. There seems to be a lot of different software and I think this probably goes back to Councillor Hanmer. So I think something that would be really helpful for me to better understand, and maybe this isn't the right time and place, is what do we invest into different software? What are we investing or planning to invest in the budget? Just kind of like an itemized list. And where are there opportunities for integration? I understand that different departments would have different needs, and so you can't probably integrate everything, but I'm curious what's been explored, what more might be possible.
Great. And through you, Chairman Henry and Councillor Basic, you're absolutely right. There are many software programs throughout the city, so it is a large question. And perhaps Keshwar would like to speak to that. What I can say, PeopleSoft, for example, does provide a lot of modules and opportunities for development. It does take time, and it takes employees to populate and explore and test. But outside of HR, I'll have Keshwar speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, our major systems are PeopleSoft. That's a general ledger system. It's our HR system, our payroll system. So we do try to go for a singular system as much as we can for a lot of our applications. So that's our enterprise system. At the same time, we are using Maximo for work order, but we're also using it for time capture of QP. So we do try to leverage as many systems as we can. But I do know we have roughly about 30 systems that he has about 3 of his systems analysts supporting. So we are at a very disproportionate ratio in terms of the IT resources that we have supporting systems. But I do take into account, Councillor Vasic, the broader question that you have, so we can certainly get back to you. If it is not needed by February 11th for budget decision making, we can certainly bring it later on. In looking at it in the more broader terms as to what our annual investment is, because there's licensing fee, there's user fees based on how many users you have on each system. There's some system used by the enterprise, like the Amanda system for building standards. So we can certainly give you a more fuller answer on that too.
My recollection from the last council and council cycle, where we did have some significant budget increases to be able to handle software licensing, and I trust and hope that we're now on a path where those are reasonably sustainable. Those were a significant part of additional budget items that the last council had to consider to fund software as a service in many kinds of ways, which is not cheap in any way, shape, or form, and is a significant expense. So good to get a handle on. I know in a question that I had just offline to Max, I got a list of the 40 different enterprise applications we have, but there are some top applications that Ms. Patel mentioned that a lot of departments run on.
And if I could add, also, Chair Henry, through you to Councillor Vasic, a lot of the systems implementations that we do it with the existing staff. So when the question comes in terms of the delay in the time and attendance, we're trying to do it with existing staff who have their own core responsibilities. So it's kind of done at the side. Whenever we get a chance, we try to do it. So that's why I think a lot of our systems implementation do get delayed, because it's hard to have the functional person as well as IT resources all available at the same time when they have certain core responsibilities. So that's where we're revisiting also how are we going to do systems implementation or upgrades when we do need to do that.
Okay, so I think in the interest of time, and I think we've exhausted this, we can move on to strategic plan update as we think strategically about where we're going, and take our first step as a council on that journey, recognizing we've already asked the community to help us along the way. So I'll turn it over to Anna Marie Cipriani to walk us through what's happening, and then our first step in it as a council.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Henry, members of council. I'm Anna Marie Cipriani. I'm here this afternoon as Executive Officer to the CAO and as the person within the organization that is guiding the strategic plan as we move forward. So I have a very brief presentation for you. I'd like to walk you through where we are, how we are moving forward with this project, and then provide an opportunity for council input. So as you know, we have an existing strategic plan. There are 6 strategic priority areas as you see them listed on the left. And it is upon these priorities that we've built our 2019 business plans and budget. As you know, also, we are in the process of developing a new strategic plan for our organization and community. And our intention is that this new plan will best serve our community and organization for the next 4 years. So I'd like to describe how we're moving forward with this work. So we're following 4 phases, as you see listed here, in these chunks of months that are before us. We've established an internal working group of staff. There are 2 subcommittees, one focusing on engagement and building that capacity for us to engage on the strategic plan work, and a subcommittee focusing on measurement and monitoring. And also, we are collaborating with MDB Insight as they are supporting our project as well. So there are a few key dates I just want to highlight for you and bring your attention to. So on March 4th, at that council meeting, you will receive a report, and it will be a scan of all of the work we've done to date and all of the consultations in this current phase. We are to book with you in March or early April an opportunity for you as council to work freely together to begin to build the plan in a workshop style format. I will return to council on April 29th with a draft strategic plan. And then on June 24th, I'll return with a final strategic plan. So after that process is complete, we then begin to build business plans for 2020 to 2023, as well as budgets. Okay, so as you are all hot off the campaign trail, and you have put heaps of time and energy into connecting with our community, I really want this strategic plan process to benefit and leverage your experience of having been on the campaign trail and from all the learnings that you have had along the way. So through you, Chair Henry, I'd like to ask each council member in turn to respond to the following question. So in your experience, being on that campaign trail, what do you suggest are the top 3 to 5 trending themes we need to be aware of and consider moving forward in order to create a new strategic plan that reflects and best serves our community over the next 4 years? So I will leave that with you, Chair Henry, to guide through. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before I ask that question, are there any more general questions of Anna Marie about the process that she's laid out ahead of us, or was that crystal clear? Excellent. So, who would like to begin answering that question? We could do that. We have ward numbers. How about we do that? Councillor Hanmer.
Yes. Hopefully my voice will last a little bit longer to do that. Thank you, Emery, for the opportunity to provide the input. Probably the number one theme that I kept hearing as I was going around the doors was smart growth, and the smart growth really encapsulating everything from how we're looking at intensification and making sure that the intensification reflects the neighborhoods, and so that built into our zoning bylaw that was just passed, and also what will probably come as part of the official plan. Equally, though, it was taking into account how we integrate our transit systems, so both walking, biking, and the mobile transit systems, and making sure that that's all integrated together. And then, of course, going along with that, keeping it affordable. So I would say those would be sort of the 3 to 5, but all rolled up into smart growth for our city.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bodley.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. So I have a few things here. The first one would be probably the most overwhelming thing that I heard from residents was with respect to traffic safety and speeds in the neighborhoods, particularly in school zones where there's heavy pedestrian traffic, and how we design our streets, and how after the streets have been designed, we keep them safe for particularly our most vulnerable people. The second thing would be around maintaining community standards and potentially identifying repeat bylaw offenders with respect to things like things like sidewalk clearing in the winter, and things like property maintenance in the summer. Those are things that I heard from residents. From my perspective, in terms of the themes that I focused on when I was talking to residents, it would be affordable housing being a significant piece that I'm sure many of my colleagues would agree is in a bit of a crisis mode here in the region. supporting active transportation and the environment, which go together a little bit. But the thing that I want to spend a little bit of time talking about in my ward specifically is with respect to embracing diversity. And particularly with the unfortunate discussion that went on around the Muslim Prayer Center in Ward 2, I think we have to look at this as an opportunity. There were conversations that I had with people when I discussed diversity where the idea was, you know, we don't have to worry about diversity in our neighborhood. I have neighbors from all sorts of different backgrounds, and we work well together, and we're just like any other neighborhood. And when I commented about the unfortunate discussion going on around the prayer center, it was, oh yeah, we are dealing with that as well too. And so the fact that this is in the front of people's minds, I think represents an opportunity for us at the city to really codify embracing diversity in our corporation. The thing that I would also like to put out there is, you know, there were a few isolated incidents where I was having conversations with people that took a very negative and sometimes outwardly racist tone. And from my perspective, it was very difficult for me to walk away from and to get over those conversations, for me to knock on the next door, worried about whether or not that next conversation I was having was going to be one of those conversations. And for somebody who comes from a place of privilege as a straight white male, this is perhaps the first time that I was dealing with this. And it speaks to the fact that for people who come from different ethnic, religious, sexual backgrounds, this is unfortunately their life. And I think that we need to recognize the fact that there is this sense of exclusion for people in our community. And as a corporation, we need to do whatever we can to bring people to the table, code this into the DNA of the city, listen to people from different backgrounds with the intent of enacting positive change. And to really make people understand that we are a place that values promoting inclusion, fostering a sense of belonging for people, and embracing the great diversity that makes Waterloo an awesome place to live. Thank you.
Well said. Ward 3.
Through you, Chair Henry, thank you. Generally, the folks that live in Ward 3 are pretty satisfied, pretty happy. It's a pretty stable neighborhood with lots of housing options, lots of different cultural backgrounds. And but three things that kind of floated to the top kind of rolled in, well, a bunch of things rolled into one. And one is like getting around. So, you know, people really appreciate the trails that we have through the neighborhood. There's a lot of talk about speeding. People drive too fast in the neighborhoods, and so that to me that builds on safety, and the other one are amenities for youth. We have, because it's an established area, there's no development, there's no new buildings going up like there is in the uptown, and we have a lot of youth, a lot of kids from, because the neighborhood seems to be rejuvenating, new families moving in. So there is a need for some activity space for our youth. And the other thing was intensification. People talked a lot about all the high rises going in and uptown, and that there's no parking in uptown, and I always had an argument for that. But so again, the intensification was, and a lot of that was from folks who have lived in the Lakeshore area forever, and now they're kind of maybe afraid, or they're not comfortable going uptown. I think that pretty much wraps it up. Thanks, Anna Marie.
Thank you. Ward 4.
Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. I heard a lot of similar comments, and people really do want the city to take a leadership role in talking about reduced speeds within neighborhoods. And I really appreciate the fact that the mayor put out the 40 kilometers an hour in neighborhoods. And as soon as that article came out in the Record, I received a lot of emails because, as you know, I've been talking about that for about a year and a half or so. And I'm trying to make it clear to folks that that doesn't mean it's going to, like, that 40 kilometers an hour would happen through enforcement. I think that we have to recognize that we need to have stronger conversations around traffic and that we live in community with one another, and that means caring enough about each other to slow down when we're within our neighborhoods. And so definitely traffic was a piece that I heard. I honestly heard a lot of people say that they feel as though the cost of living in Waterloo has increased beyond their means. And so, notwithstanding the fact that I would say a lot of people in my ward have, like, that they're very comfortable in their living environment, there's many that are also becoming to a point where they're on fixed incomes. And they're really well-educated people, and they're looking at our water rates in particular and saying that I forget what they said, but they've increased over the past 10 years. They've increased an astronomical amount of money, and I know that we're going to say that a portion of that's the region's rate, but that's not what people want to hear. People want to know what we're doing to try to reduce that burden associated with those utilities. And then we've also put in the stormwater utility. Now, in my ward, because the large properties are frozen, that helps some people. But I think we have to be cognizant of that people feel overwhelmed with tax burden from all sources. And I think, honestly, that is the number one thing I hear at the doors. The other piece in my ward is similar to what Councillor V said, that people, we have all kinds of programmed space in my ward. We have Rim Park, we have the soccer fields, we have basketball courts and all that kind of thing. But people can't passively recreate there. We're on them like crazy if they go and kick a soccer ball around on Lexington Green. And so they really do want to see places to passively recreate. And so it's really hard for me. My ward's been asking for a splash pad since 2008. And for it to just keep getting pushed out and pushed out and pushed out, it's not okay. We have development charge money in my ward, and I'd like to see that spent on getting that splash pad built because people really need it. It's not that they want it, they really need it. And similarly, we have to find a way to fund these active sports parks that we're doing the design on. We absolutely have to fund those. People want them. They're excited about the library, but they've got all kinds of youth that are building camps in our green spaces instead of riding their skateboards in a great place. And I think we really need to look at the relationship of our spending with managing some of those social justice issues and not expecting the police to manage all of them. I heard very little about the intensification. A lot of people support what's happening. I get pushback on active transportation infrastructure because I think people see that as my little cap that I wear. But in general, people like it and support it, but the few that are less supportive are very vocal. So, but I think those were the biggest pieces.
Very much. Ward 5.
Thanks. This is such a fun conversation to have. Okay, I don't have 3 to 5, but I'll try and go faster. So for sure, number 1 was traffic calming, and it continues to be. Active transportation is another one in terms of especially connections. And so connecting some of the more suburban parts of the ward, which would be the beyond Bridge and University, towards Councillor Freeman's ward, by bike, by pedestrian, by bus, and in a really safe way. especially University Ave. That's a huge ward-specific issue. So active transportation and traffic calming. Probably the second biggest thing door to door was level of service or education about level of service. And so things like snow removal, leaf collection, garbage, vacant properties. So I don't know what's possible there, but that's the kind of day-to-day stuff people are seeing. And that really makes an impact. And I think that's what I'm hearing about most of all. So I think those are sort of like the nuts and bolts of the day-to-day stuff people are seeing. But then there's the more like advocacy things that maybe you don't necessarily see, but I hear a lot of people talk about make a huge impact to communities. And so that would be increased funding for arts and culture, and finding other mechanisms for getting funding for arts and culture, and being very strategic and meaningful about how we're investing, and working with the arts and culture community, so ranging from the key cultural institutions to grassroots artists and arts organizations, so having some artist-led work there. Affordable housing, and I think in the context of provincial changes, pushing ahead as fast and as quickly as possible on things like inclusionary zoning. And I think we can all know right now, like the weather outside is freezing and my heart is just aching for people who do not have homes right now. And so I think, how can we do that in a very immediate way? My husband's picking up the keys, so now he came at the right time. Hi. This is essential, and it would be similar to Councillor Bodley, which is diversity, inclusion, and equity. And specifically, I'd like to highlight a plan for how, as a municipality, we intend to look at and address the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, and working alongside Indigenous nations and peoples on land claims issues. I'd like to develop a racial equity policy modeled after Portland, Oregon, or if there's a better model. And I don't mean to get too much into the operations. These are just things I'm aware of that I think are really interesting and important. So both the internal diversity and equity inclusion as an organization, as well as how we do that externally through programs. And youth engagement, much more youth engagement. Programming, leadership-wise, everywhere. I'd really love to see if we're including environmental things to frame it. And I think that the city's doing great things in terms of environmental leadership in the last strat plan. What I'd really love to see is just a change in how we look at it. So saying it more as climate action, because I think that's what the advocates are saying as well. And I think that has a more intense and addresses the more crisis aspect of it. And then I'd like to see how we compare in terms of investments into libraries and public spaces. So I think this also goes back to what Councillor Freeman and Councillor Veith were saying around youth public spaces, family public spaces, and just then how we are being with one another in those public spaces, who's allowed there, who's not there, and why they aren't there, which also goes back to diversity and inclusion. Thanks for letting me do that. That was so fun.
Then just wait until we try to fund all of these great initiatives in the 3-year budget. Ward 6, that would be me. Then we'll go to Neil. I heard a couple of things clearly clearly repeatedly on the campaign trail. The first of that was, when are you going to fix my road? It's old. You've never fixed my road. When are you going to fix my road? If we recently fixed a road, there's often complaints about the fixing process of the road that folks are not that happy with. But I heard that question regularly, and I think that's it'll be important for this council to set its mind to how we are going to deal with the infrastructure funding gap, on what timeline, and with what as an objective on level of service. Where are we going to meet, and how long is it going to take us to get there? The second thing I heard a lot about was affordability and housing. And that means a lot of different things to a lot of people. For some folks, they think of that issue exactly as Councillor Vasic expressed it, which is around the very bottom end of the housing spectrum of folks that have absolutely nowhere to be. But other folks speak of it as Councillor Freeman had raised, which is, this was affordable for me, Now there's one of me left in this really big house that is assessed at $800,000 or $700,000, and I can't afford this anymore. So there's a wide range of affordability that I heard about, and I think we have some roles to take on this, and others have other roles that they take in various levels of government. But for me, inclusionary zoning is a key piece of how we can work to address this, as well as a review of our city-owned lands and whether the strategy we have on those now is the most strategic use of all of those lands to be able to meet those priorities. I think there's a greater component of housing we ought to consider as we look at our city-owned lands over time. And the third thing I heard a lot about, and there's traffic safety and traffic calming and the rest, and I pull some numbers and folks go, okay, yeah, you're right, it's not too bad, it's worse over there. But there are a lot of hot spots in my area. There are a lot more hot spots in other areas. I think many of the roads in my neck of the woods were not designed as expansively as the newer parts of the city. So I told my residents that they shouldn't expect a high priority from that relative to the broader city need when we look at that. But there are some issues that we have to do around traffic safety and design that works for all modes. I think the Transportation Master Plan update is a key vehicle to help us deliver all of this from a policy standpoint and in the medium to long term. And the shorter term will be an interesting point of discussion. And the last thing that, and any individual traffic calming measure, I found it fascinating to hear it was calm in Ward 3. But it is, any individual traffic calming measures are not easy. But the last thing I heard a fair amount about was climate action, as Councillor Vasic expressed, and I'll try to stay away from too much there, as I have some conflicts in that space due to the volume of climate action that tries to come out of the other FTE in my household. But sustainability in general is important. I can speak to corporate leadership around this from a City of Waterloo perspective. And that means dealing with our greenhouse gas emissions by implementing the policy that the last council approved. But it also means making sure we really do drive a mode shift away from single occupancy vehicles, and we make those a real and viable option all year round on a more connected and obvious network over time. And I think that speaks to when people spoke of the trail they have and how do I get here and how do I get there. I heard fragments of it, but I think it comes together in that broader sustainable and active vision. Ward 7.
So I covered a lot of Ward 7. It's the only really intensely urban ward in the city. But the main things that really came up, first and foremost, was the call for safer streets. What I hear from residents is that we need to radically reorient our approach to streets and roads so that our focus is on moving people and not moving cars. That comes from active transportation. It means ease of use, safety for pedestrians, slowing traffic. These are all parts of the mix. And, research shows that taking this approach, focusing on people rather than cars, actually can improve the experience for drivers as well. So this really can be a win-win. Next up, and consistently, was talk about the missing middle. So it's housing and what is being provided and what is missing. Uptowners generally support development, but they want to see more nuance in what's being built. We need more variety in housing options in terms of size and price. And for Uptown, intensification makes this urgent. If we miss this chance, it's very hard to retroactively implement this stuff. So we're looking for a mix of mid-rise and high-rise, a mix of having more 2- and 3-bedroom units, because I had a number of seniors who want to sell their single residential home, but there's nowhere for them to move to within their neighbourhood. So that's a very significant missing gap, and it's a missing piece. And concurrently, as part of that, is the discussion of affordable housing. So affordability is a very big issue for people in Uptown, which could take some by surprise. Like we look like we're sitting pretty in our houses, but people are very cognizant of the fact that the situation as it stands is leaving a lot of people out. And that's a problem if we want social cohesion and we want to have a community where everyone can live. Third up, sustainability and the environment. People want to see the city as a leader when it comes to addressing climate change and reducing our combined environmental impact. People are very concerned about the urban forest and protecting that. And urban residents in particular want to make sure that we're finding ways that we can still interact with nature. Next up, the fourth thing that came up most consistently, and I struggled with the way to phrase it, but I ended up thinking about it as people-oriented decision-making. You know, the city has a reputation as being hard to deal with. I think what people are hoping for is that city processes can be easier and that information can be easier to find and that staff can be empowered to have more of a let's explore approach to new ideas as opposed to let's explain why it's not possible. And there's a feeling, whether it's correct or not, there's a feeling that the city doesn't always consider the end users of the decisions that it's making. So, we're making a new park. Is there shade for the kids? We're building a high-rise tower. Is there a space out the front where an Uber can stop to pick people up without blocking all the traffic on the road outside? And good user design is central to this. And probably my fifth point is more support for the arts. People want, we've got some great spaces uptown, we've got great potential uptown, but arts and culture, they need space, they need funding, and they need support. So residents would like to see how we as a city can take a bottom-up approach and really support the arts and the artists who are here so that it can create a more vibrant just daily life for residents who live here and also the residents who come uptown for their work or for their play. And public art and events would both come under that.
Do you have what you need? Oh, there's a mayor. Oh, I guess we can let the mayor go.
Thank you, through the chair. We've talked a bit about this, so I'll just go over these quickly. Affordability across the housing spectrum, but in general, like even people being concerned of their now grown children, of where are they going to buy a home in Waterloo, or how can they afford it? How can they afford the mortgage? And there's lots of things that we've done, but we need to articulate it to them. Uptown and intensification, I'll put those both out there. People are really proud of the uptown, but they have questions about the intensification, the heights of building, the uses of building, how they were approved. Sometimes, even in our neighborhood, large buildings going in there. Third, getting around. Would that be the trails, making sure they're fully connected, where to go on the trails. We heard about the cycling grid. I think all of us were approached and supported the cycling initiatives there, getting on with that. And then finally, not finally, but as part of that, the maintenance of these as well, that they need to be well maintained. The street sweepers need to go on a frequent basis. We need to know how they should be easy to use and safe. And then because I have a flavor of going through all the different wards, when people have questions, often I would say people are saying, you know what I like about the city? Everything's going right. So these are the ones where I actually heard stuff at the door, but quite honestly, at a lot of the doors, people say things are going great. Love Waterloo, no complaints, nothing to know here. But if they did, they would talk about their neighborhood first. Often what's going on, as we heard here, they're on my street, in my neighborhood. They're very proud of the neighborhoods, and I think we've kicked off the neighborhood strategy, and we'll have all the work going on in there. But I think that will pay many, many dividends to these people. Now, information. We talked a little bit here at the table about information, communication, and I think really what's driving a lot of it is misinformation that's out there. In the absence of getting clear information from whatever source that they want, their source comes from gossip. And we really need to find a way to make sure that people have the right things to gossip about, the truth to gossip about, because in a lot of cases it was dealing with misinformation at all the doorsteps because they simply didn't know or didn't know how to get it for us. So we need to figure out a better way of how we can communicate, put in real information, the truth, into people's hands, because that's really what I find that they're, if anything, 50% of people are missing the real facts. They've heard these rumors that we have to subsequently deal with. Other things, and this is simply what we've already done, it's about doing things right. Doing it right and doing it right the first time. And a great example, I think, is the Waterloo Park Promenade. Had a lot of accolades about that. And if we think back and unbundle the decision-making process there, we were going to go with either Plan A or Plan B, a commuter plan or a walker plan, and we end up going with Plan A, Plan B, the hybrid version, which people love now. People love the fact that we can use the promenade either for commuting or it has a lane that's for simply strolling along, and I think people love that. If we had gone with one either or approach, we would have had complaints. And right now we're getting a lot of good accolades because we did it right, and we did it right the first time. So like homes on homes or something like here. But doing it right and doing it right the first time is key, and I think that's part of our success. We talked about environment and throughout the table here, that was important. And then ones that I would throw on there is volunteerism and philanthropy. I think they're great opportunities to get more people volunteering, get engaged in the community. I think our neighborhood strategy can help with that. But I also believe that in light of the tightening of different government other levels of government belts, that we really need to explore that to keep the great Waterloo that we have here through the quality of life, but do it through enticing volunteerism and getting people more involved in the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I think you have everything that you need now that you've heard from Mayor Jaworski.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you all.
We will see you again at the beginning of March.
Yes. See you then.
No delegations, no consent motion into staff reports. First up, presentation from Julie Scott, Deputy City Clerk on the 2019 municipal election, the accessibility report, and more, I think I'd bill it as. I think this looks like it's beyond your legislative requirements.
It is. Thank you, Chair Henry. So we could talk elections for hours, and we promise not to do that. You have the report in front of you, but we just really wanted to highlight a few key areas tonight in this presentation. Sometimes it's easier to say things verbally than to put it in writing. So our starting point, obviously, from the report is we have certain requirements under the Municipal Elections Act to provide for accessible elections. And a lot of what really guides us has been decided subsequently through human rights tribunal decisions and in the courts. And they get built into our accessibility policy, which is our guiding document. But a really important focus for us is that all of our voters have the same experience when they go to a voting place. So entering through the same door, being able to vote independently, knowing that you can get support and having staff that are trained to assist our voters is really important to us. And so one of the things we do really early on in our election planning is reach out to our inclusion coordinator, meet with the members of GRAC, the Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee, talk to them about what works well, what doesn't work well, what we can change and tweak into our processes. We do visit each one of our facilities and we have a checklist, so we make sure that accessible door openers actually work and are turned on after hours, that ramps, the asphalt hasn't sunk over time and created, a barrier that's not possible for a wheelchair to travel over. So there's a lot of work that we do at the facilities. And then in addition to that, we're always looking to try to bridge that gap. Because we know that sometimes in order to host a poll at an accessible location, we have to then not use locations that were more convenient to voters that perhaps had better transportation. So one of the things that we're always looking for is how can we make this a convenient experience for our voters? And a lot of times, the basis of any of our planning and that big turnout number that everybody looks for after Election Day is really based on creating that initial voters list. So a lot of talk, a lot of resolutions circulating recently about voters list. I just want to give a bit of context so you understand how that list is created. The preliminary list of electors is provided by MPAC. They have access to Elections Ontario and Elections Canada information, and they also have access to property ownership information. They also use an online tool encouraging people to go and update, check their information, and we do as well in the fall, encouraging people to vote online. But creating a voters list in a municipal election isn't easy. The information that they're getting from Elections Ontario and Canada is sometimes 6 months or more out of date, so we're missing that provincial election information that happens just a few months before we get our list. And voting in a municipal election is different than provincially and federally. You can vote where you own property, where you're renting property. You can vote where your spouse owns property and where they rent property, not just where you reside. So there's a lot of complications with creating a voters list municipally that federal and provincial don't experience. And so I highlight that only because we tend to focus a lot on what that voter turnout number is, and we like to look at what does that number really mean at the end of the day. And how are our voters involved in making sure that that information's up to date? MPAC has its limitations in where it can access information. It doesn't have access to a driver's license database or health card database, the things that people tend to update when they move. So really, we have to shift that responsibility to the voters to ensure that they're checking to see if the information is accurate. And I know it's a little bit hard to see, but just to give you a little bit of a sampling of the issues that we tackle, if we look at our voters list count, almost 5% of our voters don't reside in the city of Waterloo. And that's not an issue that's faced provincially or federally. That's unique to municipal elections. And then further, when we start to divide down by occupancy status, we can see that 37% of those on our voters list are tenants or boarders. So what does that really mean? It means that there's a really good chance that that 37% information is not accurate, that it's not up to date because of the sources of information that MPAC has at its disposal really doesn't cover tenants or boarders. Unless people check that box on their income tax, or unless they voted provincially or federally previous, that information can get out of date really fast. So 37% of our voters list is tenant and boarders. And we dive deeper into that. Why is that important? Well, the 13,000 approximate boarders that we have in our city. So those are people that live somewhere but don't pay rent, typically children, end up on the voters list. Only 14% of those turn out to vote versus almost 69% of owners turn out to vote. So do we have a voter turnout issue or do we have a voters list issue? And those are some of the questions that we're always tackling when we're planning for elections. So all we can do, we know we have a voters list issue. We try to encourage people to update their information as soon as possible, and we'll continue to do that. But one of the things we try to focus on in a positive way instead is really making voting as accessible for all as possible. And the super vote was something we introduced this election in order to do that. It's like an advance vote on voting day. So anybody eligible to vote in Waterloo could vote at one of our super vote locations. So it bridges that gap for locations that might not have been as accessible from a transit perspective. Then they can go to a super vote. What it really helped solve was a problem we were hearing from our student unions was that the students don't vote because they don't know where the Waterloo Public Library is or they don't know where Albert McCormick is, and they're on campus on voting day. So we were able to hold a super vote location at WLU and at UW, and anybody that worked or attended school or lived in the neighborhood could vote at that location to make it more convenient for them. A side bonus is that it provides us with an emergency backup, because what do you do when you lose power at a polling station? Or what do you do if there's a flood at a polling station on voting day? And so now it's very easy. We can simply send all of those voters to the closest super vote location. And in additionally, what we are really happy with this election is it allowed us to provide, we always call it Accessible Plus, location for voting on voting day. So we have an audio ballot marker so people can vote independently that have low or no vision, listening to candidates' names, and then they use a joystick or different devices or sip and puff to mark a ballot. So by using the SuperVote model, we could provide an accessible voting day location for the first time ever, which we were really happy about. In order to do that, though, we needed to supply all of our vote locations with computers and computer literate election workers that could use an online voters list to strike off names so that we could give a sense of security that someone isn't attending all 6 super votes to vote plus their home voting location. I'm not sure if that is or in reality would happen, but it's a concern. So we have to be able to have a live voters list strike off, and our workers are going in online and amending information and recording them as voted. We also used a poll marker, knew this election on the ballots, so we could actually provide your poll-by-poll turnout, including the advance vote days, which we couldn't in the past, along with the super vote. So that's handy for the candidates, but what it really does for us is it starts to show us who is showing up at which locations. Does proximity to a voting place matter? These were questions that we had hypothetically before, but the measures we put in place for this election really helped paint that picture for us. So quick observations. Proximity to the voting place did matter. We found that the polls that were closest to the super votes were the ones that showed up. Those are the ballots we went through, and those were the voters that were recorded. A lot of voters emailed us and said, we loved having the super vote. I attended my location and I have a scent allergy and there was something that was bothering me, so I just went to City Hall. And we received a lot of anecdotal feedback like that. People went to the location that was convenient for them. When in doubt, they went to the super vote. You might vote at a different location provincially, municipally, and federally. Sometimes it's confusing to, people don't get the voter card, they don't think of checking online. So when in doubt, people could go to that super vote location. It gave us that all-important emergency backup, which we've never needed, but thankfully we have a good solution for now. And it really helped facilitate that student vote turnout. This is a little bit hard to see, but I'll just highlight a few. And what we noticed is when we started to map the advance and super vote turnout is that the further you got away from those locations, the number declined pretty fast. And those that were really close to a super vote and also had their main voting day location as a super vote, we noticed a real increase in the advance vote turnout. So, you go all the way down here to 1-3, their advance and super vote was 13.5%. And then we start to look at our anomalies, and this is 6-5. This is close to McGregor School, just to orient you. And they had an 80% turnout. 80% of the people that voted from that poll voted at an advance or super vote location instead of going to the location that we had picked for them, which was McGregor. So McGregor Public School has our lowest turnout. But the highest percentage that went to advance and super vote. 68% of people that live in 6-5 voted on campus, and 28.5% from 7-3 voted on campus. So we looked at who turned up at the UW and WLU super votes, and we got the results we were hoping to get for the investment, which was that the traditional student neighborhoods are the ones that voted at those 2 locations. So while we can't drill down to know exactly if you're a student or not, because our voters list doesn't have you identify by that type of status, we can start to assume that it's working, that holding those super votes is working. So planning for the future, we know proximity to voting place matters. We see that by the turnout, and we can see that now by where people are choosing to vote. We know that super votes were a great alternative and they facilitated the student voting. What we want to try for the next election is vote anywhere within the ward. It'd be very easy to do. It wouldn't require any additional resources now that we've already made those initial investments. So it's very easy to do. We don't think vote anywhere within the city is really meets that cost benefit test, because what we've noticed is that people still go to the closest super vote. So it really would cost a lot more money to do vote anywhere in the city. We'd have to have 35 different ballots at every single vote location. So there would be a lot of additional expense, and we don't think we would get a return on that. But we think Vote Anywhere within a ward will make it really simple, so people, if they go to the wrong school, it's not a problem, as long as it's within the ward. And we also used this time a micro super vote at Luther. So previously, some of our long-term care facilities, what we're finding now is they have life lease components or more independent living along with long-term care facilities. We're required to hold time-limited votes for long-term care facilities and institutions with a certain number of beds. And in the past, that meant only those individuals could vote for that time-limited poll. And so Luther Village, as an example, and West Hill, we noticed it at as well, they would have to go to a different location to vote. And so using the super vote methodology, we were able to hold a vote at Luther Village and West Hill where anybody that lived there could vote there, or they could choose to go to the other location or one of the super votes as well. So we know the online voters list is valuable. We know the poll matrix is valuable. We're only really starting, to be honest, dive into the reports now. There's a number of reports we can run through our various systems, but we do know that investing in this technology has given us important data to date, and we're looking forward to planning more and hearing any feedback you have as well. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scott. I think that was a very helpful and informative romp through the changes that sound like they were very successful. I particularly appreciated the dive as well into the challenges of voters lists and some analysis on what turnout may look like and may not, and that we spent a lot of time focusing on the numerator, and it's the denominator that may be causing some of the most egregious challenges in the numbers in some of those. So I'll look to councillors for questions. If they have any, Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you through the chair to Ms. Scott. When I read the report, I notice it says electors deleted 12,800 during the period of just September, October. So in 6 weeks, over 12,000 people were removed from the, quote, voters list. But you have to have somebody who actually identifies to say that person must be removed. So it's not, I'm just wondering how we went through that. That's an enormous number. That's like 15% of the voters list, I would think. So just wondering how those people got deleted. Maybe it was on election day, the vast majority of them. It's an astounding cleanup.
Through the chair to Mayor Jaworski, that number comes from a couple of different sources. So it is partially through, to be honest, and we appreciate this, people showing up at the voting location with their voter's card and saying, my 2 or 3 children don't live here anymore. So we received a lot of that. We asked election workers to hold on to those cards. We've heard a lot of complaints over the years of people saying, I let the election workers know last election this person didn't live here anymore. And it occurred to us that when they say that, they mean literally the person that's handing them the ballot, and that information wasn't getting cataloged. So we've put a lot bigger focus this election in doing that. Part of this is just from voters list cleanup as well, that number, that 12,000. And the information we hear from MPAC is that people move a lot. The percentage of people that change in a 6-month period of time is quite high, and so part of that number is from an MPAC cleanup that we received after the initial list. But I would say that we've really appreciated our residents letting us know and bringing those voter cards with them to the voting place and saying, this person doesn't live here anymore. We brought back stacks from our polling stations this time, and we're holding on to that information so that we can do a quick check for getting ready for 2022 to make sure those changes stuck.
I would just like to, through you, Chair Henry, I'd like to thank you for pulling all of that together, having just survived the election, or for all of you, so thank you. For the voters list, I can attest that in Ward 7, at least, we had considerable difficulties because there were some entire buildings that weren't listed. So there are dozens, at times hundreds of residents who just aren't even in the calculations anywhere. So I appreciate that this is a tough nut to crack, but I'm really thankful that you're already looking at it for the next election. And I'd also like to call attention to the breakdown you had of voting by age. And I would love to thank all of the young voters 18 to 21 turned out at a much higher percentage rate than people in their 20s and 30s. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to just lay that down as a challenge next time, so that the millennials have to try and keep up with Gen Z.
Thank you. And through the chair to Councillor Bonagor, I did want to point out that one of the things we do really early on is try to identify all the new builds in the city and work with those property managers. And in particular, we worked with communication staff at Cooperage to try to get people on the voters list before they showed up to the voting location. So we did actually see some really good results from that, but that's really important to us. And I'm really excited because we're working with the city studio. So I was actually just at WLU this morning talking to a really eager group of students who are going to tackle that 22 to 40-year-old age group and come up with some fresh perspectives and new ideas on how we can engage that group and improve that number.
Councillor Vasek?
It's not a question, but I just feel like I should say in public also thank you, because I've emailed back and forth with Julie today about getting to the location as an accessibility challenge, and how like enthusiastic you seem and responsive your team is to exploring other ideas and meeting new people. Like you said, you've been out this morning and you've offered to go out to a spot in Ward 5 that also had some accessibility challenges to get to the election. So I just wanted to say in public, thank you so much. And you and your team and your enthusiasm, I think, is really making a difference, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Is there anything else? I'll just note, I appreciate Councillor Bonagor's enthusiasm around the 18 to 21s, but I think this is a denominator problem more than anything else. Since the data is so poor, all of those students on the voters list, all the students coming into the community would not have existed on the voters list. And so the ones that turn out have 100% turnout on the voters list because they showed up to be counted. And so I think there's something wonky going on in that data. I'd suggest for City Studio folks, as they look at, to the extent that you can, breaking out age groups by 4-year age groupings would be really helpful to track a cohort's participation over time, election by election. So you can track them, the 18 to 21s, and the next time they're in the 22s to 26s, and follow that along over a number of decades, and watch to see how the path changes for different cohorts. Because I think that is the generational question that I think most people miss when they focus on a particular age range and how an age range changes over time, because they're different people each time. And I say this as someone for whom this was a significant part of my data analysis in my master's work that was focusing on demographic changes over time and tracking these things. So that's something that I picked up. I know that doesn't always sync very well with StatsCan data, which is part of the challenge. But I think it could be helpful for getting us data points over many elections. But thank you for all this work. I think we're just receiving this as information. I'll need a motion from Mayor Jaworski and seconded by Councillor Hanmer to receive it. All those in favor of receiving, it has been received. Next up, we have, thank you very much. Next up, we have Waterloo Park Lake frontage reconstruction. This was an advanced capital project that Council approved in principle back in December, and now it is back. I'll turn it over to Annalise Sangster in just a second, but just because this will help Council as we think about Capital Budget Day on February 4th, this is an example of what would happen for a non-routine project. When a non-routine project would be approved on Budget Day, it would come back like this one would for a funding release. Whereas a routine project would not come back for this presentation on funding release if it's categorized that way on budget. So this is a live example of what we're going to see on the 4th and 11th and throughout the year. With that, I'll turn it over to Annalise Sangster.
Good afternoon, Chair Henry, Mayor Jaworski, and members of Council. My name is Annalise Sangster. I'm a landscape architect in Environment and Park Services. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge Waterloo Park Advisory Committee members who are in attendance today. Amanda Stellings, the chair, Peter Weatherup, Helen Bergstrom, and of course, Councillor Bonagor. This presentation by staff will have 3 parts. the general description of the Waterloo Park Master Plan, a staff overview of the proposed Waterloo Park Lake Frontage Reconstruction Project, and supporting 2019 project priorities in Waterloo Park. After answering any questions Council may have for me, Amanda Stellings, Chair of the Waterloo Park Advisory Committee, will deliver a message on behalf of the committee. So the 2009 Waterloo Park Master Plan replaced the 1989 Waterloo Park Master Plan. The current Park Master Plan includes planning framework for master plan development, vision, guiding principles, and objectives of the plan. It describes the design context of each activity area identified on the preferred concept, which is what you see before you. And it recommends an implementation strategy that continues to evolve based on available funding and public engagement in priority projects identified and supported by the Park Committee and ultimately the community. Also, it recommended a mandate for Waterloo Park Advisory Committee to focus on implementation of the Park Master Plan. People are often confused about what a master plan is as it relates to park planning and implementation, and the level of design it may include. To clarify, I offer the definition of stages of plan development with reference credit to the Royal Institute of British Architects. The Waterloo Park Master Plan offers a general direction and does not incorporate technical analysis into the recommendations. This is the point where both the proposed Waterloo Lake Frontage Reconstruction and the proposed Waterloo Park West Water Play Area projects are at currently. Compare this with the construction tender, which is detailed to the point of specifying exact quantities of material for accurate pricing, offering clear vision, direction, and construction outcome. This is a milestone that will be achieved prior to starting construction for each of those projects. Between these 2 points, coordination is required between the direction of the plan, the available project budget, the project schedule, and since these are municipal park projects, it will be important to incorporate the outcomes of public engagement as the plans are advanced in a design direction to the point of construction tender. Moving on, splash pads are a popular way to cool off in hot weather. The City of Waterloo's only splash pad, Lions Lagoon, was constructed in Waterloo Park in the early 1990s. It has exceeded its useful life cycle and requires replacement. Approval of the request to release 2019 capital funds for the Waterloo Park Lake Frontage Reconstruction Project will confirm Council's support for staff to initiate public consultation and planning to decommission Lions Lagoon after the 2019 season, and will allow coordination with the Silver Lake project team to develop detailed plans for a new Silver Lake terrace and plaza in place of the existing splash pad facility. The draft 2020 to 2028 capital forecast includes funding to construct 3 additional splash pads citywide, including implementation in west, east, and north neighborhoods between 2020 and 2022 under direction of the parkland strategy that is currently underway. The Waterloo Park Master Plan recognizes the significant cultural value that residents of Waterloo place on Silver Lake. Providing the public with improved access to the lakeshore is a recommendation of the master plan. Relocation of the splash pad facility in Waterloo Park will provide access in a prominent location to a greater demographic all year long. The Waterloo Park Master Plan recommends providing water play amenities in 2 activity areas in the park. So shown on the image before you, along Father David Bauer Drive frontage and at the EB Farmstead. The intent of the master plan is to offer smaller water play areas in different locations around the park as opposed to a single large splash pad facility in one location. And to ensure there is an operational water play area open in the city in 2020, if Lions Lagoon is decommissioned, a smaller water play area is proposed in a location along the park frontage along Father David Bauer Drive that will be constructed in 2019 with capital funds allocated from the 2018 and 2019 Waterloo Park Master Plan Implementation Project, with intention for this area to be a natural extension of the urban design style of the existing frontage elements. Currently, there are adequate capital funds available from the 2018 funds to initiate public consultation and planning a new water play area, subject to approval of the recommendations in the staff report tabled today. Staff will return to council after approval of the 2019 capital budget to request release of the 2019 funds required to construct the water play area. The proposed Waterloo Park Lake Frontage Reconstruction Project will enhance the north shoreline of Silver Lake in Waterloo Park through implementation of the Silver Lake Terrace and Plaza, being a year-round destination with interest for people of all ages during all seasons. It will be coordinated with the Laurel Creek Silver Lake Public Consultation, detailed design and construction project, and be implemented under the same contract. The Waterloo Park Master Plan Figure 3.13 identifies this activity area as a destination situated in a prominent location where at present the Lions Lagoon splash pad facility is located, as well as Lions Lagoon surface parking area and the Victorian Gardens. Key components of the vision for this area outlined in the Waterloo Park Master Plan and other city policies include shade, seating, landscaping, inclusive and accessible access, strong physical connections to abutting activity areas and trail routes in Waterloo Park, including to Silver Lake and around the shoreline, and making connections to the History Walk. A plaza abutting the water's edge with an interactive and dynamic water light feature and offering all-season activities. Development of the abutting segment of the park circuit, which in the master plan is called the Interior Perimeter Walkway. Accessible public washrooms for future location implementation, and inclusion of public art as per the city's public art policy. With council direction, the Laurel Creek Silver Lake Detailed Design Consulting Team will initiate public consultation with a purpose of developing a vision that includes the Silver Lake Terrace and Plaza and encompasses these priority components that can be integrated seamlessly into the existing park surroundings. Project limits are generally shown on the image before you and will be finalized through design. The initial phase of implementation could be focused on reconstruction of the plaza area along the north shoreline, providing access to this area, complete with a dynamic water feature that is visible from points across Silver Lake. Future phases of the vision for the Silver Lake Terrace and Plaza will be detailed and implemented as funds come available. In 2019 capital budget requested for release will be used to undertake public consultation and complete design details for the above scope, in addition to decommissioning Lions Lagoon. The capital funds forecast for availability in 2020, subject to council approval, will be used to construct the activity area along the north shoreline. Finally, we get to the park project priorities for this year. So the 2019 Master Plan implementation priorities endorsed by the Park Advisory Committee in 2018 in coordination with supporting the Laurel Creek, Silver Lake, and Waterloo Park Lake Frontage Reconstruction Project included, in order of priority, a new water play area along the Father David Bauer Drive frontage, a detailed design in Phase 1 implementation of the park-wide wayfinding signage system, and if funds are available, to complete the functional design vision for 2 entries to the park as shown on the screen before you. So at the Visitor and Heritage Information Center and also at Seagram Drive east of the LRT station. Additional information will be provided through a future staff report to council upon approval of the 2019 capital budget. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. I know we've got the chair of the committee. Perhaps we'll let the chair come up and speak as well on behalf of the committee, and then we can ask questions of everybody involved should we have them. Amanda, come on up.
Good afternoon, Chair Henry, Mayor Jaworski, and members of council. So as Annalise said, my name is Amanda Stellings. I'm the chair of the Waterloo Park Advisory Committee. The Waterloo Park Lake Frontage reconstruction is an exciting project that the Waterloo Park Advisory Committee is very thrilled about. We, along with the members of the community, understand and appreciate the cultural value that the lake has on the community and the city as a landmark feature of Waterloo Park. The reconstruction project will provide opportunities for the north shoreline to be opened up, enhancing visual and physical access to the lake shoreline. The committee is eager to see the project unfold and be implemented through construction. Myself, along with the committee, is excited to see a new children's water play facility being contemplated for the west side of the park, suitably nestled among the other children's activities along Father David Bauer Drive. The committee is excited for the lakefront project and supports staff's recommendations to council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for staff or the committee? I'll let Tennille go as the committee rep first.
Through you, Chair Henry, thank you for bringing this for everyone to see. I'm very excited to see Silver Lake getting some TLC. It's more of a comment. I just want residents to rest assured they won't be left without a splash pad under these plans. Lions Lagoon, bless it, it's probably past its best before date, but we're going to get another year out of it under this plan. And the idea is, with the funding's release, the new splash pad would be open in time for the following summer. So I think if that was a concern, I just wanted to rest people's minds at ease.
That's helpful. Moving into questions, I saw Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Henry. Annalee, can you please confirm that this work won't impede the ability for the ball diamonds to be used?
Through you, Chair Henry, no, we will work around the ball diamonds.
And I just had a comment, if that's okay. I think it would be really interesting if we could look at the design for this splash pad and see whether or not the proposed locations in the east and west side are of a similar size, such that the design could be reused, and that we'd only be looking at the capital implementation associated with the construction of those sites instead of the full design. Because if we can, then we might be able to bring those other splash pads online earlier in the capital budget, and I'd really like to see that. Recognizing that this is a smaller venue than we've had before, and it's the only venue that we have in the whole city, I think it makes sense to really look at this budget and see how we can stretch it to its maximum potential, and see those other ones come online too. I must admit, like, I've spent time in Victoria Park in Kitchener, and that's one of their premier splash pads. There's no parking anywhere near that splash pad in the summer. And we've only got the one parking lot on Father David Bauer Drive to support this side of the park, which is ball diamonds and everything. I guess there's also the parking area near the pavilion, but it's a busy side. It's going to become busier with the splash pad. And so if we can help people to go to other parts of the city, I think that's really beneficial. And Tennille may know this, but I've always struggled with continued investment in Waterloo Park when a lot of people can't get to it. So from my ward to Waterloo Park by public transit is really challenging. And so I think we really need to look at how we can invest these dollars in splash pads very, very efficiently.
Like if there is an ability to streamline design processes to the extent possible, that's always helpful. I would note for Council's interest in the capital forecast, project sheets 229, 230, and 231 are the relevant splash pad items scheduled with draft funding release in 2020, 2021, and 2022. So I don't know how much earlier than 2021 can get, but certainly the speed of design to construction could be aided by having functional design. Sure.
There is efficiencies in tendering too, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, if we looked at this progressively, we may actually be able to tender 3 splash pads for 2020 and save a lot of money by doing that. One tender process, the contractor gets more work for the same team, and it's exactly the same design. So all the parts, all the whistles, all the valves, all the pieces are the same. There's got to be efficiency in that.
I think we'll call that staff can take that back and report back to council at a future date with what may or may not be possible under the timelines we have for this project. But certainly efficiency is helpful. I've got Mayor Jaworski, then I've got Councillor Heath.
Thank you. Through the chair, and I'll ask Mr. Silcox-Childs to listen in because we've had a conversation before about the baseball diamonds and the fencing around it that probably need replacement. The splash pad will be adjacent to like first base on the baseball diamonds, so will there need to be additional fencing there, or what will keep this safe since both will be used during the summer months?
Through the chair to the mayor, we'll be looking at different options. You're absolutely right. First baseline is right there, and the splash pad would be located in fairly close proximity to that. So we're looking at different options, including planting. I don't really want to get into a netting type situation if we can avoid that, but certainly planting. There's also a need for some shade in that area, so that may come into play here as well.
And Councillor Veith.
Through you, Chair. Henry, I just want to support Councillor Freeman's comments about splash pad, because my neighborhood is desperate for, even if it doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles, but we have single moms in my neighborhood that have to get on the bus and with their children to get down to the only splash pad in the city. So I would really value that that little bit of work on making this happen sooner than later. Thanks.
Anyone else on this item? Seeing none, I will look for a mover of the recommendations. I'll look for Councillor Bronigar, and seconded by Councillor somebody, Councillor Hanmer. I was looking around, didn't see hands. So seeing the hands, all those in favor? That's carried. Next up, we move from parks and splash pads to financial control budget policy updates approval, which we're just going to keep doing. Any questions on Brad's report? Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Henry. On page 46 of 120, FC-014, the new revenue policy, I just want to confirm, are we putting away the same amounts or more or less where it comes with regard to the allocation of assessment growth?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Freeman's question. We are allocating the same amount of assessment, which is 40%. We've just put a larger amount, in this case 30%, to CURF for rehab and reinvestment, and less to CRF for new growth-related capital. So the same amount of assessment is being allocated away from operating to capital, with a greater emphasis on rehab. And this policy is really more housekeeping to update that, with refer to the assessment growth policy as the master policy on that one.
My other question is with regard to policy number SC-1018, and that applies to the members of the city's organization, including members of council. It's with regard to the allocation of overhead, capital overhead fees. So it's a fee applied as a percentage to reimburse the operating budget for internal resource support. So I just wanted to know how we determine that fee, and kind of how do we benchmark that? So, for example, you said that a project that's less than or equal to 1.5 million, you allocate 6% of overhead, and if it's over 1.5 million, you allocate, is it 4%? Is that right? 3%. So yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of how you benchmark that, and whether or not that, like 6% on a small project is a lot. 4% on a big project feels like less, even though it's more money. But I kind of wanted to get a sense of how that's benchmarked and whether that could decrease.
Through Chair Henry to Councillor Freeman, the percentages, I'll say, have been in place for some time. The notion there on reducing the overhead to 3% on the larger project is to not overcharge the larger projects. We are reviewing this right now in advance of the 3-year budget to see if it's appropriate or what opportunity there is. Basically, we're looking on finding the right mix of recovery, but we also need to protect against overcharging capital to provide an additional benefit to operating, and that would kind of be counterproductive to a lot of the initiatives that council have been making around allocating more money to CURF to help address the backlog we're facing on capital. So we want to appropriately recover the cost on the operating side, but we don't want to overcharge capital just to help with ops. So we are looking at the percentages to see if they're accurate, and that's something we'll be reporting back on.
And I guess I wondered whether or not the timesheet module in PeopleSoft could be a useful tool in terms of evaluating this. I mean, this is obviously what consultants do on every project, right? The project's allocated a project number, and the time people spend on those projects is tracked. And I really think that we need to get a handle on these numbers, because the burden from the tax base associated with this, the allocation of staff time away from other projects, other work, I think is really important. And certainly some projects we're undertaking just can't bear this amount of money on the capital. So if we look at the button factory and the need for an elevator, that's a very small project. And if we took 6% off that budget, off the capital side, and put it into operating, that might make it not feasible, and yet it needs to be done.
So through Chair Henry and Councillor Freeman, something we can definitely look at, but just for clarification, all of the project values that you see in the budget 2019 and the forecast that are subject to overhead have that embedded in the amount of money. So it is budgeted appropriately based on these percentages when it's to be charged, but we can definitely look at other options of how we can track that.
But sorry, to be clear, it's embedded, but by embedding it burdens onto the tax rate, right? So I mean, I think more broadly, like, this is an opportunity for us to look at these numbers and say, is there a way to reduce the burden on the tax base based on what the time is actually being spent, and or hold people accountable to keep their time at a certain level, for lack of a better way to say it.
And I've heard that that's a review that's happening this year, which is useful. And otherwise, it's housekeeping at this point. Any other questions on the financial control policy, 3 or 4 other words in that? Nada. I'll look for a mover. Moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Freeman. Any further discussion? All those in favour? That's carried. Next up is a report on the Uptown Community Improvement Plan, annual update report, and an additional commercial building improvement loan that we're required to approve here. Any questions for staff on this item? Continued investment being generated in rehabilitating and expanding in the Uptown, which is fantastic. And seeing no questions, I'll look for a mover of this. Councillor Bonigar, Councillor Freeman, all those in favour? That's carried. Next up, we have revised program refund and withdraw policy. Any questions for staff on this item? Councillor Bonigar.
Through you, Chair Henry, it's a clarification as much as anything else, but I noticed in the refunds policy, for an inactive account, there's a plan. Is there a plan to? So if the account is deemed inactive, if it's under a certain amount of money, the funds will just go to the city. If it's over a certain amount of money, it will be refunded to the person minus an administration fee. Is there a plan in place to actually contact the person to let them know that their account is about to go dormant?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bonacore. We did look into this. Currently, the current practice is to send form letters to those whose accounts are over $50. The issue with the current system of ActiveNet is we can't look at accounts based on date of last transaction, and there's no means to automatically email people.
Through you, Councillor Henry. Our current practice is to send a form letter to all people who have a credit of $50 or more that have been inactive for a 2-year period. Most of these people have left town or have not forwarded us a change of address. So we do that. We give them 1 month to reply. If we don't hear from them, we do write it off. Anybody that we hear from subsequently within a 7-year period that is asking for that money back, we do reverse the transaction.
The reason I ask, I'm just concerned that there might be a family who, like, family life goes quickly, and 2 years sounds like a long time, but it's not really. So I just want to make sure that people aren't kind of missing out on the opportunity to use funds that they may not even realize they have sitting there.
Through you, Councillor Henry, one of the other things to note is that under the new policy, there is not a financial incentive to take your refund as a credit on account. So most people will likely choose to just take the refund. So going forward, we should have fewer accounts with credits that become inactive. People will take their money back when they withdraw.
Money in your pocket rather than money in our pocket we have to administer and think about and send letters about and, I don't know, look at frequently. I think it's better to have it, particularly for busy families. Any other questions? Those were mine before the meeting as well. So that's perfectly fair. Seeing none, I'll look for a mover. Councillor Bodley, Councillor Freeman, any further comments or questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Next, award of RT 18-22, Waterloo Public Library Main Branch mechanical upgrades. Any questions about replacing these heritage mechanical systems in our modernist library building? Councillor Freeman wants to talk about mechanical systems. That sounds true.
Yeah, I did the civil degree, not mech eng, but I am very excited and encouraged by the QBS system and that it's projecting a return to the budget of $640,000 on a $2 million funding window. Like, that is a huge amount of money, and I'm very excited, and thank you. Thank you for leaning into this process, and please, let's keep using it if it's going to show us numbers like this.
I'm seeing people reaching for mics, so I'll let you go.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Yes, we are also very pleased, but we will still keep our fingers crossed until we complete the project. But we are pleased, very pleased. Yeah.
There's no question these are messy systems, highly integrated, but fixed over the years randomly by people who don't write down how they fix it.
Yes, and I think it's always useful to know that there are ways for us to find some projects we can get to come under, other projects, which we're going to get to next, do not. And so the lives of up and downs that we see on capital projects are helpful. But this is encouraging. I'd agree with Councillor Freeman. We'll see how encouraging it is once it's done. Seeing no other questions, I'll look for a mover of the support. Councillor Freeman, Councillor Bonagor, any further comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Let there be a working mechanical system at the library. I think that's going to be very productive and helpful for many people. Speaking of productive and helpful for many people, particularly in their basements, award of RFT 18-20 Beaver Creek Sanitary Pumping Station Emergency Overflow Tank. Any questions on this item from Council? Councillor Bonagor? Questions about storing poop for an hour?
Well, it's no questions. We need to. Through you, Chair Henry. This is largely just for my background, given I'm going to play the new councillor card. This tender came in substantially lower than the nearest next, and the others were all of a ballpark, but this was significantly less. Is there an indication as to how or why? Are we looking at a longer timeline? Can you give me some ideas just so I can understand how these differences can come about?
It is a very good and important question. I'll turn it over to staff.
Through you, Chair Henry. It is a good question, and we always do a thorough examination of the tenders when they come in. And part of the complexity with this project was the geotechnical, and we found a confined aquifer that was going to pose issues with digging a huge, gigantic, deep hole. And contractors
depending, we kind of leave it up to them how they're going to build it. We have to design something that is constructible, and whether or not they want it to do an advanced dewatering system, or in this case, without getting too technical, doing a shoring system. And the way we give them all the reports, there was a geotechnical report, and there was a lot of people, I think, that felt shoring would be required, and it's really their comfort level. A big deep hole sounds simple, but it's actually, it can be complicated if you don't know what you're doing. And we have confidence in FinBuilt. Our engineering consultant has worked with them numerous times with pumping stations, and they're local, and they're very knowledgeable of the area and the geotechnical conditions. So we're pretty confident that they have taken the right approach. I don't know if that answers the question.
And certainly there are cases you can run into trouble where people low bid and you're stuck with them based on a low bid procurement system. But so the right question to ask is, how confident are we that these folks know what they're doing and can get stuff done? So that's good. Any other questions on this item? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover. Mr. Bartley, seconded by Councillor Bassick. All those in favor? That's carried. And as we learned on some of our tours through, having a storage overflow tank is useful because there is only one other place for this stuff to go if we can't pump it, and you don't want to have that problem. So this is very useful. Last up, we have city utilities 219 rates, and I'll ask Michael to come to the podium, and Todd will certainly be available as well to handle all the what's a water system all about questions. And Michael, what's this cost, and how does you work with numbers? Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Chair Henry. Mayor, members of council, what we're here for today is just to provide a bit of an update since we met last in December. We took some of council's feedback and comments over the last couple months. And basically brought back the same report as we had attached as the appendix in December, except we've added Appendix C, which kind of highlights some of the changes and things we're going to be recommending for the report. So there's basically four kind of bullets from Appendix C, so I'll go through them fairly quickly, and I'll focus mainly on bullet 1 afterwards. So the first thing we've addressed was council's desire to have a lower water distribution rate versus proposed $1.92. We've revised our recommendation to $1.90. We've done this by revising project reference 568 from the capital budget, and again I'll talk to this in just one second. We've also done some smoothing of the rate forecast for sanitary sewer rates. This does not impact the 2019 budget or any budget requests or approvals. It's simply smoothing the increase year over year to be a bit more in line with the previous year. Third bullet, it talks about the household impact calculation. There's always been confusion about how this is derived, and we've tried to include a table that shows each of the input numbers and how that equates to the dollar impact year over year and how that equates to the now 4.4% impact year over year. And lastly, we've shown a breakdown of the rates on the water bill and kind of in discussion about how the blending period works. So we always talk about there's a region portion of the water rate and then there's the municipal portion at the city level. So our water bill, we've put a snippet of the actual water bill from 2018 that shows those two different rates, and a bit more dialogue about how the blending period is calculated. So back to the first point with the water distribution rate. So I mentioned we've revised capital project sheet reference 568. What we've done, it's an annually funded project for water main rehabilitation citywide. So there's no specific project identified at the budgeting stage. Staff budgets for these amounts annually and identify projects closer to the date what needs rehabilitation. So the original budget process took place in the summer of 2018, and we've since been able to refine the projects for 2019 and 2020 a bit better since. So staff was able to not reduce the overall budget, but simply take $800,000 of funding from the next couple of years and push that out $100,000 each year over the forecast period. So we're not really reducing the budget. We're actually just kind of moving the impact out a little bit to soften that rate increase for 2019. What that will do is it will reduce the revenue budget for 2019 as well. So you'll see that there's a budget request, B50 has now been reduced by $191,000 because of that 2-cent reduction for 2019. So reducing that water rate, just for context, and there's a chart further on as well. So the rate forecast for the water distribution rate is going to be a bit lower for the next few years, but 2025 onwards it will be a bit higher just because of shifting the spending outwards a little bit in order to maintain the reserve levels as well. And as I mentioned earlier, this changes the annual household impact from 4.7% down to 4.4%. And that's a reduction of about $4 annually for the average household. So not huge dollars, but it was taking into account what we could do with that one project sheet. These are just a couple charts just for council's ease of comparison. The chart on the top is from the original rate report in December. The one at the bottom is what you see up in front of you today for approval. And you'll see that it's just the third row there, the city portion of water and sanitary sewer has gone down to $18.48 increase. Or sorry, down to $14.74 from $18.48. Everything else remains the same. We have not adjusted anything else in the capital program or forecast. And this is just kind of a snippet again of just the rates that we've impacted since the December rate report. So I mentioned we reduced the water rate to $1.90 versus $1.92. And as you can see, by 2028, the original report in December had a rate of $2.58. Now it's up to $2.67. So it's a little bit less now and a little bit more later. Kind of just tilting that blue line from the top chart versus the bottom part. We're just tilting it a little bit to have lower increases now and a bit higher ones down the road. And for the sanitary sewer side, as mentioned, there's really not much of an impact to the 2019 rate, or by 2028 we still arrive at that same rate as we had previously. So it's just really smoothing the bumps out in that brown line in the chart. So and that's through just purely rate increases and decreases. There's no capital budget or any budget impacts to the sanitary sewer smoothing. So that's just kind of an overview of what's changed since the December discussion. Todd and I are here to answer questions from the original report, any new questions that have come up, or to talk about some of the ones from Appendix C as well. So, turn it over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Looking to council for any questions of staff on the report and changes. Mayor Jaworski.
Just on point number 7 there, to regarding the high water bill programs. Will that have any impact to the rates, or is that something that we can just we'll be able to move forward on based on what we do today?
Yeah, through Chair Henry, Mayor Jaworski, if a program was to be adopted at that council report later on in this spring in 2019, we would identify any monies that need to be set aside or budgeted. However, based on our initial kind of research, it's not substantial enough to really have any impact on rates.
And we'd see whatever that may or may not be in the 2020 to 2022 approval at that time. Yeah. Okay. If there was any impact. Okay. That's helpful. Any further questions, council? Seeing none, I'll look to get this on the floor. Moved by Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Bonagor. Any comments from council before we take the approval? Councillor Freeman.
I guess my only question is, at some point in time between now and the 3-year budget, I'd like to better understand chart number 3 on page 107 of the report, where it talks about the rate stabilization reserves as a % of annual operating expenses. And I'm trying to get a sense of whether or not the target, like the 10% target, is resulting in like a real buildup of the reserves, meaning that it's resources that we just don't have enough staff to spend within a year, and whether or not that 10% is the right target, or if it should be 7% or 8%, 8.5%. That's all. I'm really cognizant of people having a lot of conversation about water rates in the city, and getting a sense of how big the reserves are. And it's a really important process. It's a really important thing that we do, delivering clean water to people. And, sometimes when people ask me, what do I get for my taxes? I respond, clean water. because I do think it's really important, and it's a privilege that we have it here. But I just really would like to better understand those pieces, if that's okay.
Sorry, just to add through you, Chair Henry. There was a rate design study conducted back in 2016, and it's mandated by the Water Act that every 5 years, I believe, the Utilities Division has to undertake a financial plan, and that's where some of these targets had come out of. So we're due again in 2021. So we'll be looking again at these targets and again dollar levels and things like that if they make sense. These were just the ones that were approved by council at that time, so it's not so much.
And let me say to staff, I think is something to take away as an education opportunity, because not all of council present today was present at the time that we had those rate design studies. I know that over the balance of the year, staff are working on both public and council education and feedback sessions on asset management and long-term financial strategies, of which rates are a funding component from this. There's a service component that I know Councillor Freeman has raised questions about. Reserve funds are an important tool that we deal with on those, as well as the state of those assets and how they change over time and all of those. So I know we're going to have opportunities through this year to learn more about how these work and to make some decisions on some of those as the asset management policy comes forward and other items come forward. So I'd ask staff to take back what further opportunities can be built into that process to respond to the question Councillor Freeman has today, specifically on where the reserves and the targets are coming from, and those other questions about capacity to deliver relative to those targets as we go through. So I think we've got opportunities to dovetail those into existing planned sessions in the coming months. So if that works for council, I don't think we're going to get that done effectively today, but I know there's opportunities coming forward on the calendar this year to do that.
And I agree with that, and I think that one of my challenges is when we do get those rate reports, sometimes it's hard to translate that into this conversation in terms of what the number looks. And also, I'm trying to be honest about what I am hearing at the doors, and to say, you know, did I as a councillor overlook something?
So I think we take that all as useful feedback for rolling forward. Any other questions or comments on the rate report that we see before us? Seeing none, and before the vote, I'll just say thank you to staff for sharpening pencils on this item and looking in a really detailed way at the 10-year capital forecast. We have an obligation, and in fact, personal liability for ensuring this obligation is met on the safety of our water system as recommended and considered by the experts we hire on that. That's a post-Walkerton, I think the current provincial government would call that excessive red tape, but we have a personal liability to make sure that we actually deliver clean water to people and that we're funding that system. So without impacting in any negative way the capital forecast and budget to achieve that, I appreciate that staff have figured out how to smooth the rates in a way that will have a net positive impact on average for households of about $3.74 a year, and a revenue change of about $191,000. That's good work today by this council and by staff on that as we get into the meat of the rest of the budget. Those are real dollars, and I know they matter to people. So with that, I'll take the vote. All those in favor? That's carried. Consideration of notice of motion given in a previous meeting. We have none. Notice of motion, I've heard of none. Communications and correspondence and regional information and correspondence, we have none. There is no unfinished business. Is there any new business? Mayor Jaworski holding up a BlackBerry, 20 years plus a couple of days?
There is 20 years and 2 days, as a matter of fact. The device in your hand that keeps us so productive, invented right here in our community, that eventually became the smartphone. So happy 20th birthday to BlackBerry. I love you, BlackBerry.
Good, positive announcement, and Mayor, I know you appreciated the very positive coverage you got to have of showcasing the devices you've had over the years. Front page of the record, not bad. Anything else, Council? Seeing none, just confirming that we have nothing. Are there any questions, Council? I should ask that. Seeing none, who would like to adjourn? Councillor Freeman, Councillor Bodley. All those in favor? That's carried.